As of January 1st, 2023, the following things will go into effect, and people need to be aware of this. It abolishes cash bail for almost every offense. This includes, but isn't limited to, kidnapping, armed robbery, second-degree murder, drug-induced homicide, aggravated DUI, threatening a public official, and aggravated fleeing and eluding. Offenders released on electronic monitoring have to be in violation for 48 hours before law enforcement can act. They could almost drive to Alaska before we can even look for them. It denies victims their constitutional rights. And keep this in mind, businesses and homeowners. Officers will no longer be able to remove trespassers from your residence or your businesses. Someone could decide to live in your shed, and all we can do is give them a ticket. You have to decide what level of force is required to remove them, and whether or not it's legal. This is a massive threat to the residents of Orland Park, Cook County, and Illinois.
New York, the 2020 murder rates increased by 37.3%. and by 37.5% in Philadelphia compared to 2019 rates. These cities, of course, all have things in common. They're all run entirely by Democrats. They all have strict gun control measures that criminals don't follow. Law-abiding citizens are disarmed, the criminals are not, and the deaths follows accordingly. And they're also all epicenters of the Democrats' radical push to defund the police. This committee has confirmed one senior official at the Department of Justice who's advocating defunding the police, and this committee is preparing to move forward on a second senior official at the Department of Justice who's advocating defunding the police. If Democrats want to stop gun violence, let's have a hearing on how the move to defund the police is causing more homicides. Let's have a hearing on how gun control proposals are making people more vulnerable to violent crime and how they failed the big city Democrat cities. That actually would be a hearing focused on crime and stopping it, and not instead a made-up topic of ghost guns. We already know that homemade guns are not a problem in terms of actually being involved in violent crime. When the Department of Justice surveyed criminals to ask how they obtain firearms used in crimes, not a single one appears to have said that he made his own weapon. Hear that again. The Department of Justice asked violent criminals, where'd you get their guns? Zero said it was a so-called ghost gun. 43% of criminals got their firearms from underground markets. 6% stole them, and 25% of them obtained them from an individual. So why are we talking about this made-up issue? It's simple. Democrats don't want to address the consistent, proven, empirical failure of gun control laws. They don't work, and they make crime worse. But they also want to scapegoat law-abiding citizens. The hobbyists who make homemade guns, who are not committing crimes, they want to scapegoat them. But the real issue is in something Chairman Blumenthal made several references to. He referred to these guns as untraceable, and that term was meant to be ominous. That's what this is all about. The Democrats on this committee want to trace every firearm in America. They want a registry of every firearm in America. They want a government list of what guns there are, who owns them, how many they own them, and inevitably, when you see countries enact registries of firearms, the next step is confiscation. And numerous Democrats on this committee have advocated for confiscating firearms. At home, Heidi and I own firearms. There is no government list of the firearms we own, and I'm very glad there's no government list of the firearms we own. We have an amendment in the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment, that protects the right to keep and bear arms. This hearing is not about some real threat that's producing violent crime. There is zero data to back up that this made-up phantom of ghost guns poses a real threat. Chairman Blumenthal wants to target violent crime. I would encourage him to join Senator Grassley and me in the Grassley-Cruz legislation that I introduced 9 years ago, targeting violent criminals, going after them, improving the background check system, improving the database, prosecuting felons and fugitives who lie, trying to illegally buy a firearm. And I would note that when Grassley-Cruz was voted on the Senate floor, in 2013, in a Democratic Senate, it got 52 votes on the Senate floor. It got 9 Democrats who voted in favor of it. The most bipartisan support of any of the comprehensive legislation. And the reason Grassley-Cruz didn't pass is Senate Democrats, including all 3 of the senators on the Democratic side of the aisle here today, voted against it and filibustered it, blocked it. Blocked real legislation targeting violent crime. Why? Because the objective instead is to target law-abiding citizens. That does nothing to stop crime, but it does a great deal to undermine our constitutional rights. I will note, finally, that as Chairman Blumenthal observed, there's a Rules Committee markup on legislation, S1 legislation many of us are referring to as the Corrupt Politicians Act. I'm going to spend the rest of the day in that Rules Committee markup introducing and pressing a number of amendments.
Across the country, police departments, cities, towns, and communities are dealing with an alarming increase in the number of homicides. From Portland.
Everybody has their head on a swivel.
To Birmingham.
Let's go right over to the street.
Now to Austin.
This certainly is not the right reason, not something when we're setting this type of a record that we want to be in the news for.
Where the fast-growing city has shattered its yearly record for homicides, making 2021 the city's deadliest year on record. A CNN analysis of more than 40 of the most populous cities in the U.S. shows 9 that have already set homicide records before year's end. Indianapolis has surpassed their 2020 total of 215. Philadelphia with 524 homicides to date, and Albuquerque, New Mexico with 103, and Austin, Texas.
What's it like to see the numbers of homicides that you guys are experiencing right now?
You know, it's just really disappointing, quite honestly.
Austin Police Chief Joseph Chacon says there's no one reason for these record high numbers, but he has noticed a disturbing trend.
We have seen really a spike in gun violence. So, just a proliferation of illegally owned weapons on the street, and of illegally owned weapons on the street.
Nationwide, more homicides are being committed using guns than ever. Shootings have increased nearly in all major U.S. cities that track that data. And there have been 88 homicides in Austin so far this year, according to the police department. Double last year's total, and the city's homicide rate has ticked up to 8.5%, putting it on par with numbers not seen consistently since the 80s. Experts recommend looking into community-based approaches to reducing violent crime.
Police need to be at the table, and police are part of the solution, but they are not the whole solution. You need community-based organizations and law enforcement agencies working together.
Activists agree.
Maybe if we were sending other types of resources other than just police into our communities, we would be having different outcomes.
Chris Harris says he's seeing more guns on the street, leading to not just violent, but deadly consequences.
Guns are just more accessible across our country and across our community and across our state in particular.
And of illegally owned weapons on the street.
Austin PD is working to turn the tide using its real-time crime center and new Office of Violence Prevention.
If these guys were fighting, we can watch exactly what's going on.
Other cities are also looking into violence reduction strategies to combat violent crime.
We have a problem that is much deeper than Baltimore City.
In Baltimore, the mayor there says they've taken 2,000 guns off the streets this year, but the city's homicide rate has remained steady in recent years. Mayor Scott says it's something many mayors around the country are dealing with.
We still have the historical things that are happening, the drugs, the gangs, the money, but so many more people are dying over small interpersonal disputes.
They're using gun violence to solve petty beefs. It is a culture. It's a way of thinking.
As the country grapples with a historic increase in the homicide rate and a reimagining of police departments, back in Austin, they're looking for solutions as fast as they can.
We need to get ahead of that problem, and as a community, as a city, that's what we're doing.
So if there's any doubt about defunding the police, let me just read this list. Austin, Texas, 2020 and 2021. Austin, Texas, $150 million cut to the police. I don't know, Mr. Roy. My guess is Austin, Texas probably got a Democrat mayor, Democrat council. Is that right?
It does, and it's a third of the budget.
Baltimore, Maryland, $22 million cut to the police. My guess is, I know, they're that city controlled by Denver. Boston, Massachusetts, $12 million cut. Denver, Colorado. Mr. Bucks, Denver, Colorado, got a Democrat mayor, Democrat city council. You bet. $55 million cut. Los Angeles, California, $150 million cut. Madison, Wisconsin, we know that's Denver. I went to school in Madison. I know what kind of town that is, run by Democrats. $2 million cut. Minneapolis, $8 million cut. Philadelphia, $33 million cut. Portland, Oregon, $16 million cut. San Francisco, $120 million cut. Seattle, Washington, $69 million cut to the men and women who wear the uniform to protect us right here in our nation's capital.